Has Trump inflicted permanent damage on American democracy? Or, in the long run, will his efforts to pervert and destroy American institutions make their democracy even stronger? What is the role of social media in amplifying extreme points of view and the voices of conspiracy theorists? The last few years have placed unprecedented pressure on America's domestic institutions and traditions. Today, I'm joined by David DeBatto to explore the effects of this full frontal assault on Western democracy and to discuss what comes next as Trump contemplates his next crack at the presidency. Welcome to Silicon Curtain Podcast. If you enjoy the topics we cover, please like and subscribe to help boost the popularity of our videos in YouTube. David DeBatto is a geopolitical analyst, writer, and podcaster. He is a retired US Army counterintelligence special agent and Iraq War veteran. He served as team leader of a tactical human intelligence team in operations within Iraq and is also a former police officer. David is considered too conservative for the progressive left and too independent-minded for the radical right, which may suggest he's getting the balance about right. Either way, David is a controversialist of sorts, often irreverent, always passionate, and seeks to challenge political dogma and naked self-interest of certain politicians. He has strong pro-science and pro-education credentials and condemns the encroachment on society of irrational, violent, and dangerous conspiracy theories. And in the next hour, we're going to unpack a lot of that, aren't we, David?
I hope so.
Excellent. Well, let's start with a fairly forceful statement that you've recently made on platforms like LinkedIn. Now, you get trolled a lot, don't you? Not just by Russian bots and useful idiots, but also you get trolled from your own side by people in the US.
That's true. Since 24 February, I've been writing exclusively about the war in Ukraine. And so I got trolled, of course, by Russian bots, Russian trolls, Russian supporters, and so forth, which I expected. Recently, since we're approaching the midterm elections in America in November, I started posting about the American election and the danger, as I see it, of a Republican victory in November if they take over both the House and the Senate. I say a danger to both American democracy, but maybe more importantly right now, to the war effort in Ukraine, the support for the war effort in Ukraine by the United States and NATO. And so since I started posting about the possibility of Republicans winning in November, I started getting trolled by the GOP, the grand old party, or the Republican Party in America. And I got at least as much insults, threats, and trolling as I do from the Russians. So it's to be expected, but it's still a little disconcerting.
And of course, I mean, it has to be said, I think not everyone will hold this point of view, but if Trump had won a second term, we would be seeing a very different outcome in the Ukraine war, wouldn't we? You wouldn't have the same NATO consensus. You might not even have NATO at all, and you certainly wouldn't get the huge inflow of weapons, equipment, supplies, resources, humanitarian resources, and perhaps crucially, that kind of training and support, which has been so crucial in radically reforming the Ukrainian military.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, as you know, Trump is very anti-NATO. And even though his supporters try to keep saying, well, look, Russia didn't invade on Trump's watch, he waited for Biden, that's ridiculous. If Trump had won a second term, I don't think America would be part of NATO. I really don't. And if we were, we would have pulled a substantial amount of funding out of NATO, which would have hollowed it out, which would mean that NATO, would not have had as much money to support Ukraine. In fact, if America pulled its support out of Ukraine, which, believe me, it would have done with a Trump victory in the second election, NATO, I don't believe, would have supported it at all. We would be looking at an entirely different world scenario if Trump had won a second term. That used to keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night now is that the Republicans might win in both houses of Congress. in November and achieve essentially that same goal of pulling our support out of NATO again, and subsequently to Ukraine.
And I think, that's probably not the primary thinking of the offensive that we're seeing in Ukraine, the highly successful offensive, but that must have entered the thinking a little bit. Let's get this done. Let's show a really strong initial victory to keep our allies supporting us, to make them believe that Ukraine can actually win the war. The other big factor, of course, coming down the line is winter. And we know that Ukraine had to achieve some gains in territory before winter really set in, because that really wouldn't help their side, wouldn't help the Russians too much. But, that might have cemented or frozen the war until the spring. So it's ironic, isn't it, that these factors, like the US election, like winter, are almost certainly driving Ukrainian thinking. The other one, which of course plays really well with the MAGA crowd and even with many mainstream commentators, is the price of fuel and energy. And I think one of the biggest weapons Putin has in propaganda terms, but also material terms, is that hiking of energy prices. Now, what's your sense of American commitment to Ukraine, and how far is that going to be tested with sky-high energy bills that people are going to be getting in the run-up to winter?
Well, I think you bring up one of the most important points right now. One of the concerns, one of the primary concerns I know of the Ukrainians was and is the continued support of the United States. And believe me, they're just as aware of what may happen if the Republicans win the midterm elections, and beyond that, if Trump wins a second term in 2024. So I'm not saying that was the reason for the counteroffensive right now. I'm telling you, it was part of the equation. It was a big part of the equation. They needed to show not the world so much, although they wanted to do that too, but the United States primarily. They needed to show their benefactors, their primary supporters, the United States and NATO, that they could win. And until just a few days ago, Jonathan, most pundits really didn't believe that Ukraine could win. They thought there'd be a stalemate at best and then peace talks, but nobody was really talking seriously about a Ukrainian victory. They are now. And I've said it for a long time. I believe you have said it as well. I've always believed that Ukraine can and will be victorious over Russia. They're starting to show it now, but they also know they have to actually have some major victories. They have to prove that they can win, that they can turn this around, because they're afraid of a Republican electoral victory in November. In fact, recently on LinkedIn, I posted several comments from both current Republican leaders, congressmen and senators, as well as candidates for the US Congress and Senate, who said quite openly, if they're elected and if the Republicans win the House and Senate, they're going to pull American support out of Ukraine. They were very, very blunt about that. So how can the Ukrainians or NATO not be cognizant of the fact that if the Americans elect a Republican Congress in November, and then Trump again, or even a Republican president 2 years later that's not Trump, how can they possibly count on American support? So they're trying to show what they can right now.
And of course, there's another bias, isn't there, that no politician, and this isn't just America, this is anywhere, no politician wants to back a loser. No matter whether it's a strong moral cause or not, if they think there's a chance they're not going to win and not come up smelling of roses, that's a tough one for politicians on the left and the right. And in effect, I think we see that happening in Germany, don't we? We don't see a strong commitment to delivering arms. We see promises made, promises broken and delayed. Part of that maybe for more sinister reasons. The word compromat has been mentioned there. But even just in practical terms, the Germans may just be saying, well, let's get a stronger signal as to whether Ukraine even has a chance before we commit materials, our reputations, and destabilize our political system internally.
Absolutely. Let's leave historical precedents aside here with Germany and the 80-year guilt. And let's even put the word cowardice aside for a moment. You're absolutely right. I think you nailed it. They're waiting to see who's going to win. They really, really are. And if you want to call that cowardice, fine. but they don't want to be tagged to a loser, as you said. And if there's any way that they feel that Russia's going to win, they don't want to be on the wrong side of that. They're already going through a major upheaval in Germany with the energy prices. There's a huge controversy about that. They still haven't supplied most of the weaponry that they've promised to Ukraine. And that's part of the reason they don't want to infuriate, even at this point, they don't want to tick off Putin any more than they have to. And so they've been holding back. And that's infuriated a lot of people, including myself. I've written quite a bit about that. But part of it is exactly what you said. They don't want to be on the losing side. That's wrong, in my opinion. It's history is not going to treat them well. The Ukrainians are livid about this. But it's all about being afraid of Putin and being on his wrong side.
Absolutely. And I was trolled yesterday, relatively politely, but trolled by some Germans, basically asking me, what right do I have to comment on German politics or German attitudes towards Ukraine? And and they made some comment about Brexit. Well, I'm a vehement pro-European. My relatives fled Nazi tyranny in 1939 to come to Britain. So I think I've got every right to point German attitudes out here and call it, absolute moral cowardice and absolutely reprehensible that they won't supply Mardas and Leopards to Ukraine, that they actually won't even allow Ukrainians to buy them on the open market, and they'll block their partners from supplying.
After what Germany's responsible for, and again, we can't not ignore history. After what Germany did to Europe, and Europe is still going through because of what Germany did, I'm sorry, they are going to have to accept some criticism for quite a while. And since they put into motion so many of the events that are still occurring today, that we're still digging out of a hole, they are increasing their criticism by what they're not doing with Ukraine. I mean, the irony and the hypocrisy is just shouting out about how they're leaving the Ukrainians at the mercy of Russia after what Germany was responsible for. I mean, to me, it's beyond the pale. And so for any Germans to say that, how dare you for criticizing us, I really think they need to do some more thinking. And I was also trolled about that recently, so I know what you mean.
I mean, could we go as far as to say they're indirectly complicit in genocide?
You can. Well, and there was an article today, and I reposted it and commented about it, about how Zelensky directly said that the outcome of the war in Ukraine may hinge on whatever support Germany does or does not give, and if what promises they fulfill or do not fulfill. And he said how history is not on their side, and that if anything, Germany should be the leaders in helping Ukraine. And in fact, they're dragging their feet. So no, this is a pivotal moment for Germany. Not, of course, not just for Germany, but especially for Germany. And so far, with few exceptions, they're not up to that challenge.
And I think, having talked to a number of historians of the Second World War, who also look into Russian myths and have examined, the same myths on the German side, there is not yet, even now, recognition within Germany that when they have war guilt, that war guilt is to the Soviet Union and largely Russia. They don't think of it as guilt towards Ukraine, and yet it was the territory of Ukraine and Belarus that were physically devastated. It was Ukrainian soldiers that formed the largest part of the Red Army that was annihilated. And of course, their civilians suffered terribly. So German guilt should be more subtly directed towards Ukrainians, and yet it's obviously been projected onto Russia. And this is partly perhaps also explaining their confusion and the fact they're holding back, but it's entirely misplaced.
Absolutely. I mean, the atrocities that the Nazis, the Wehrmacht, committed in Ukraine are just unspeakable. Mass graves that until recently were undiscovered. Since World War II, they keep discovering them. Just the horrible things they did to, of course, the Jewish community, but even the non-Jewish community in Ukraine. It was just unspeakable. So to not be able to dredge up that collective guilt over Ukraine, over what Germany did, to me is just unconscionable.
Well, let's turn back to the US, because we're going to examine some fairly controversial topics that are taking place in US politics. And let's carry on with Trump. How far did he subvert the democratic norms of the US, or was he only building on subversion and sort of degradation that was already happening prior to his presidency?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's been asked a lot since 2015, since he first started into the political arena in a big way. Let's just say this: what the Republicans are doing now, and what Trump is doing with the Republicans, is nothing new. What the Republicans are doing now, if you want to try to put a date on it, you could go back to the 1950s with McCarthyism and what was called the Red Scare. And then bring it a little bit more to the 1960s. And now his name's going to go out of my head. The senator from Arizona, Goldwater.
Ron DeSantis, is it?
No, Goldwater, 1964.
Goldwater, sorry.
Yeah, who became very good, close friends with the Birch Society. I don't know how familiar you are with them. They were the 1950s and 60s equivalent of, I guess you'd call them the QAnon people. They were the most extreme, off-the-page, right-wing conspiracy people of the day. And then you continue on to Ronald Reagan, who broke up unions, trickle down economy, go up to the 90s with Newt Gingrich, who had a little disaster called the Contract with America, where he started to break down the norms in a very big way. And the Contract with America was basically to eliminate the left. That also was the time frame, mid to late 90s, of the rise of Rush Limbaugh, who set a fire to the airwaves and really brought a lot of these conspiracy theories and right-wing nut jobs, wing nuts, out of the closet. And then on into the present day. So what Trump has done has really just been building on 50, 60, 70 years of a Republican attempt to break down democracy, really, to lead it towards authoritarianism. Having said that, I'm not going to let him off the hook, because we could very easily have gone along the way that we were, having a less than likable Republican Party who did fight against democracy, but did it in a very, for the most part, civilized and lawful, non-violent way. Without Trump, in my opinion, we could have easily gone along that way for forever. At least for a very, very long time. No, what Trump did, he took all that anger, all that guilt, all that repressed anxiety, all those feelings of inadequacy of the people on the right, on the Republican side, who felt they were left behind by modernity, by technology, by not being able to cash in on internationalism and working on computers and having white-collar IT jobs and all the rest of it. He spoke to them, and he got them very, very angry. He doesn't believe in any of the things he says. He's obviously not a poor person. He doesn't know what a farmer does or a carpenter or a plumber, but he speaks to them, why? With anger. He knows how to raise anger, how to raise the temperature level. He put aviation fuel on a fire that was already burning and simmering in America, and it exploded. He happened to do it at the time of the internet and social media. If he had been around in the 70s and the 80s or before, even with his rhetoric today, he would not be the Donald Trump we know. We would not have had January 6th. We would not be looking at the possible end of our democracy. We wouldn't be looking at armed militia stalking congressmen's houses, the Secretary of State and the election officials' houses, and sending death threats to members of Congress and to law enforcement, and now the FBI. So no, Trump didn't start this, but he fueled the fire, and he opened up a Pandora's box, which I don't think we could ever put back in. It's gone too far now, and it's acceptable on the right for political violence and the worst kinds of threats and conspiracy theories to be out in the open And he made it acceptable also to not accept the truth. We are in a post-truth era because, excuse me, of Donald Trump.
And of course, Donald Trump didn't just appear. He's been around for 20 years. He's written books. He's been on TV. So that's built up his personal persona. But he has been political, hasn't he? I mean, semi-political for that time as well. And I know Roger Stone was persuading him on numerous occasions to run for presidency previously. But as you say, that wasn't in an era of social media that could sort of amplify and create these echo chambers. So what role do you think social media has played in eroding the norms of American political discourse and consensus?
I think it's the number one cause. And I've said and written about that a lot. The internet and social media, which you can't separate the two, are the reason, at least America and probably Western Europe and a lot of the world is in the situation it's in right now. Without the internet and social media to spread the poison, to spread the lies, to spread the conspiracy theories, and the potential for violence, we would not be in this position. Look, human beings haven't changed that much in the last 20, 30, 40 years. There's always been violent people. There's always been conspiracy theorists. There's always been criminals. There's always been mentally ill people. There's always been people with guns and knives and all kinds of things. Nothing's changed, really. The only thing that's changed is the internet and social media, a way to immediately amplify those thoughts and to get them all over the world and to find like-minded people who can talk to each other anonymously. That's the key, anonymously, and make threats anonymously to the President of the United States, to a congressman, to a judge, to a policeman, to anybody. That's never been possible before. And in America, you combine that anonymity and immediate access with just infinite amount of guns, and you have got the situation that we're in right now. And when people tell you that there's no chance of a civil war in America, that no, it's all hyperbole and people just letting off steam, and it's the internet and social media, they don't know what they're talking about. No. They really don't. There's so many people out there right now in this country with guns. Yes, with mental health problems, with just irrational anger, who are being stoked and lied to every day by Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, McCarthy, the speaker or the leader of the Republicans in the House, and so many Republicans and right-wing militia that they are just on a razor's edge and waiting for the word to launch a violent civil war.
I mean, I did speak in the preparation for some of the videos I've done recently. I did speak to a CIA guy who'd been involved in various things through the years, including sort of counterinsurgency and all the rest. And I was hoping for an optimistic answer here. I asked him, well, what do you do to de-radicalize? What do you do to take society back from the edge? And I was hoping that he'd describe some kind of process, some kind of media, some kind of laws. He just said a lot of body bags, a lot.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that's worked in counterintelligence, counterterrorism, or intelligence analysis of any kind, or even law enforcement, knows that we're in a very, very dangerous, volatile situation here right now. This can be handled. This can be fixed. But even the experts, the people that know the most about civil wars and insurgencies, will say it takes a long time. Our special forces, all special forces, work with countries and try to help them to overcome insurgencies. They launch counterinsurgencies to try to protect the government of those countries, and that takes years. Unless you're going to go in to topple a government, which has been done, it takes a long, long time to change what's called hearts and minds. You don't do it overnight. And what's going on, at least in the United States, Jonathan, is, in my opinion, we are witnessing the biggest cult in at least recent human history, if not all of human history. And I don't say that lightly. The Nazis were a cult, but they were nowhere near as big as the cult of Donald Trump. and the Republicans in America solely from the fact that they didn't have the population. America now has roughly 340 million people, of which 76 million voted for Donald Trump in the last election. I believe more will vote for him next time. And even if you say 10% of those are hardcore cult members, that's 7.5 to 8 million violent cult members who are willing to die for Donald Trump. To me, that's very scary.
That is scary, and there's a one. I mean, we're going to talk about some fundamental differences between the UK and the US, which isn't, intended to put us in any kind of superior position, because we're not. Our democracy is under extreme threat and duress, and many of the traditional norms and checks and balances have been eroded here in the last few years. But I think there's two major differences between the US and the UK, which are going to predict, I think, whether events turn into social violence or whether they don't. In the UK, they won't. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is we do not have a radical Christian white minority. We don't have that same religious fundamentalism here. Even, of course, in the Muslim community, again, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny minority that are radicalized. So we don't typically have a religious problem in the UK. We're largely, in that respect, a tolerant, and I would say not necessarily atheist, but we're largely a kind of agnostic society. And that's one big difference, and we'll come to that in the US, because of course there is a large radicalized, angry white nationalist minority in the US who are now translating that into political power. The other aspect, which is so worrying and which I find difficult to understand, is that there are many positions within the US administration, within the diplomatic service, even within the judicial service, that are politicized. They're political appointments based on political ideology. In the UK, we have a long tradition of trying to depoliticize these roles and have them totally independent of course, they're not immune from bias, they're not immune from corrupt influences, but generally, you won't have a political radicalization of the legislature or the police force or the army, for instance. But it's different in America, and that is quite worrying.
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the primary changes or actions that Trump has promised if he is elected for the second time. We do have what's called a civil service system here, which is a mechanism whereby federal employees and state belong to a very structured merit-based system. So they are not overly partial or corrupted with political influence, except maybe at the very top. Well, Trump is going, if he's reelected, he said he's going to do away with that. He will sign an executive order on day one, essentially doing away with the civil service system, which means he will appoint all political cronies to all important and even unimportant federal positions from top to bottom, essentially gutting the American government and only installing people that are loyal to him. And yes, he can do that. He's already done that with the Supreme Court. That's a much more complicated issue, but because of lax laws or lax areas of our Constitution, the Senate was able to do that, to stall, to lie, to connive and get their way to vote for the judges that they wanted. They've done the same thing at lower levels. We have many, many different levels of judges at the federal level, going all the way down to the state, which is just key. Why? Because when during the next election or elections in the future, it comes down to maybe just a few votes, which it did in the last one, he will have his own people appointed at the state level, federal level, and judicial level to overturn the results of those elections and just say the Republicans won. That's not my imagination. The Republicans are actually saying this out loud. They
tried it, didn't they? They actually tried it at the last election.
Well,
and
it
didn't work. But
here's the great point. What they did, they tried to do it illegally. They tried by blunt force. just to go in after the votes had been counted in every state and put their own people in as adjudicators, as people who count the votes, and said, oh, we're the real counters here, we're the real judges, and walk in and recount the votes. They almost got away with it in several cases, but they didn't, but almost. If they had, all they were going to do was to throw away all the votes for Biden and all the Democratic candidates and just say Trump won. They admitted this. It's not even a secret. So
it's on tape, isn't it? He even said, like, we need 6,000 and however many. You know, he gave the exact figure of find this many votes and we're done.
He called the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, who is the politician, the state official in charge of elections in Georgia. And he called him up and he said point blank, I need 18,870 votes. Can you find them for me, Brad? And Brad said no. Raffensperger said no. And this phone call actually lasted more than an hour.
He threatened him indirectly multiple times, didn't he?
I don't know if it was multiple times. It very likely could have been, and it wasn't the only person. We know now that also Rudy Giuliani called, as did Senator, not Nelson, from South Carolina. Name escapes me. But there was several high-profile people who called the Secretary of State in Georgia and tried to strong-arm him illegally, of course, to just throw out legal votes. What they're doing now is they have election deniers, people who have said the 2020 election was rigged, Biden is not the legal president. They have these people running for office in all 6 states where it was really, really close for Trump and Biden to run as the Secretary of State on a Republican ticket. They will be in charge of the elections mechanism in November and again in 2024. They will not allow a Democrat to win. They've already said it's illegal for the Democrats to be in office. They will throw away any Democratic votes that they think they need to and write in the Republican votes. So in those states, a Democrat will never win again if these slate of Republicans win those key positions in those 6 states. And even if they don't win, they're going to say that the election was fraudulent and that they should win and to start a riot in their states. It's really kind of gotten out of control.
And they have a mandate from their electors because 60% of the GOP base fervently believes that Biden is not the legitimate president against
75%.
75. Okay, it's higher than I thought.
Yes, they believe that Trump won, that Joe Biden is not the real president, and about 10% of those believe that John F. Kennedy Jr. is still alive and coming back.
Yep, he's going to come over the horizon with Elvis and all the rest of them.
They had an actual rally about that in Dallas several months ago. This is no lie.
Absolutely. And let's make quite a radical connection here, because I think the same connection can be made in Russia. So where you have a deeply religious society, and from my perspective, religion is nothing more than a sort of, quite a complex structure of superstition. No matter how cleverly it's argued, it's believing in things that you cannot see, you cannot test, you cannot experiment on, and you cannot prove. Once you have a substantial group of people who are willing to accept magical thinking, that does translate into all sorts of other propaganda, suspicion, conspiracy theories. We see this in the USSR, where you have a deeply deferential population to authority that also had orthodoxy, which is not a questioning religion. It's, more of a smells and bells kind of religion, I think, as it's being called. And that kind of belief, that well of belief, was transferred pretty easily to communism, which again is another belief system that places your happiness in the future rather than in the present. Similarly, in the US, you have a huge percentage of the population that believe in a religious doctrine of one sort. Not all of them will be completely radical and thinking the world was created in 7 days and the more extreme ideas, but you do have this huge base of, I would call it, magical thinking. That is now translating into a fair degree of political chaos, isn't it?
Well, yes. It's funny because we discussed this off air before we went on about how America is actually, as well as the UK, becoming much more of a secular state. Religion in general in America is not anywhere near as high in popularity as it ever was. In fact, it's at its lowest. I'm talking organized religion where people go to church every Sunday and so forth. However, the big difference is, or the big problem is, in my opinion, the ones that still do believe and are very fervent believers are much more radical. And the majority of those people, the very fervent Christian nationalists, the overwhelming majority are Republicans. They belong to they either belong to the Republican Party outright or they vote with the Republican Party during elections. And of those, a sizable number, maybe 40 to 50% of the very religious Christian nationalists in the Republican Party are evangelical Christians. That's where you run into the very hardcore people and even the violent people. They have a very unyielding understanding of the Bible, of Christianity. They take it literally. And it is the word of God, and any deviation from that is blasphemy and a sin that could be punished by anything up to death, to execution. Hence the noose and the gallows we saw in front of the Capitol on January 6th, where they wanted to hang Mike Pence and put a bullet in the head of Nancy Pelosi. Many people felt that this was a justified action for what they called treason, which was just doing their jobs.
Which is absurd because the vice president is apparently an extremely religious person himself, and Biden is a Catholic. So these kind of facts don't really seem to hold any sway.
Well, it doesn't matter because this is the same party, the Republican Party, who always is supposedly so much behind law enforcement, back the blue, and all the other slogans, where now they actually have warrants out to kill and execute FBI members because they served a lawful warrant to search Donald Trump's residence. In Florida, many Republicans want these agents executed and their families killed. Any police officer, how many Capitol police officers, rather, that defended the Capitol building were threatened and almost pummeled to death. 5 did die before and after. And many of those and still receive death threats from the so-called back the blue Republicans. So no, that's all hypocrisy. They only back anybody, whether it's law enforcement, politicians, or anyone, if they agree with them. Once they don't agree with them, then they are the enemy. And since we're talking about evangelicals and very hardcore Christian nationalists, again, the penalty for disagreeing with them is very severe. I can't tell you how many times I've read about these people, not all, but enough, who want to round up all liberals, all Democrats, put them in a stadium and execute them. Not only execute them, have public executions. Where have we heard that before? Saudi Arabia?
Iran. I mean, I can say the similarities with Iran are quite
Muslim
uncanny.
countries, extreme. ISIS does this, of course. Extreme Muslim Islamic terrorists do this. And this is coming from our own homegrown American Christian nationalists. It scares me to death, to be honest with you.
So let's look at, and I've spoken to some individuals here. I've spoken to some extremely rational, intelligent, well-informed individuals who are traditional Republicans and who rightly are horrified by, the MAGA crowd and the extremism. And yet, if you were to ask them what is the greatest threat to American democracy, they would still say the radical left. Yes. And so it does seem that even though there's this huge portion of radicalized people believing absolute nonsense, there is a well of propaganda narratives that also work with, I would say, the much more balanced and rational conservatives.
right now, and I know a lot of people who are currently in intelligence, retired from the intelligence community, current or retired law enforcement officers, current and retired military members, and all of them who are admitted Republicans who will say, yes, I'm a conservative. I've been a lifelong Republican. I'm still a Republican. Even the ones, like you say, who disagree with the MAGA extremists and some of the violence will, just like you said, when pushed and confronted, will still say that the biggest threat we have to our democracy is radical liberals, is socialism. And that's what we have to stop. No matter
Bernie
who
Sanders, who is fairly centrist to my point of view, not radical left-winger at all, really.
Well, you know, they give you basically the answer that they hold their nose around Trump and some of the radical Marjorie Taylor Greens and all of that. But when you put them together or alongside Joe Biden and the radical left, they'll vote for the Republicans every time. And to me, this is insanity. It just, again, but that's what a cult is. When push comes to shove, they will always go back to their brainwashing, to their doctrine. They will never look at the facts. And it doesn't matter if the facts mean the death of our democracy or even civil war. That's what they're going to stick to.
Now, we talked again before we started speaking on camera about the news that's just broken, that it's been reported by Reuters, and Reuters has tended to be very conservative on Ukraine, and in fact, it's even done some fairly dodgy reports. But they produced a report just in the last day or two to suggest that hundreds of millions of dollars of funding have gone since 2014 from Russian government into political parties, radical groups. And I think you were saying that actually there are rumors, at least, maybe unsubstantiated, but certainly widely circulated rumors that actually there's a lot of funding gone into evangelical radical organizations in the US, clearly to destabilize society. But could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's fairly well known in intelligence circles, at least those that work in these areas, that Russia, specifically the GRU, SVR, foreign intelligence, have been actively working the radical right in America for years. This goes way back before Trump, but since Trump started running for office, they have just re-tripled their efforts. And they have given, we don't know, I read the same report you did, but they have given funds, resources, meaning training, and actual people, operatives, giving training to radical right-wing militias and evangelical groups, sometimes overtly, meaning these groups knew exactly who they were dealing with, sometimes covertly. They did not know who they were dealing with. And they have trained and funded these groups with the specific goal of disrupting America, of causing all the polarization that we're seeing now, that we've seen for the last many years. That was their job. And they've done a very good job. And even with the last election, I'm talking 2016 election now, the first Trump election, it was known by our intelligence community that many of the social media comments and insults and controversies were started by Russian operatives. And there was even several news reports where they went out in the street and interviewed Republican voters who had responded to these comments on social media. And they said, did you realize you were corresponding with a Russian agent? This was not a Republican. This was not a state or a federal official or anyone for Donald Trump. This was the GRU. It's the Russian intelligence service. And many of them, even when told about this, said, oh, really? Well, I don't care.
Fake news, or I don't care, which is...
I don't care. Well, not even fake news. Some of them said fake news, but even the ones that admitted that it could be true said we don't care because we want to get the libs. And if it means working with Russia to get the libs, then we're going to do it because we need to shake it up and, you know, to put Trump in office. So that's the depth of the problem we have in America with the far right.
And isn't it even more pernicious in some ways? Because not only are they just thinking, well, Russia's going to help us, but we don't care anything about Russian values. It's not like that, is it? They actually see Russian values as being the same authoritarian, religious extremism, white nationalism. They see those alt-right values actually there, tolerated in Russia, guiding political thinking, foreign policy. And they're like, yeah, that's what we want to implement in our country too.
Yeah, and that's been going on for a while, and that's where the problem is, the symbiosis. The American right, the far right, the people we're talking about, the Christian nationalists, the evangelicals, you could trade or say or print many of the things that come out of the Kremlin and insert it into a speech by an evangelical or a right-wing militia member here in America, and you wouldn't know that it came out of the Kremlin, or vice versa. They share many of the same beliefs, which is why the Kremlin has doubled down on their propaganda and their operatives here in America. They know that. The radical right here believes in what the Russian Orthodox Church is selling, at least what they say they are, and what the Russian people really do believe in. They don't like the gay community. They're not for gay rights. They're not for women's rights and abortion. They're not for democracy. They actually support a very strong and brutal leader. They like this. They're not turned off by that. They actually laugh at a democracy where a president doesn't have full power, and where the people actually have too much power in their eyes. They believe in a strong church. They don't believe in the separation of church and state. And that aligns perfectly with Christian nationalists. Marjorie Taylor Greene and what's her name? Boebert. She's she's a nutcase from Colorado, a congresswoman. She was made a speech the other day. It's all over the internet saying, what do you mean the separation of church and state? There is no such thing. The church is in charge and the government is subservient to the church. And she really believes that. She's not saying it should be. She believes that's how it is now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the same thing. They're saying that the church should be in charge. There should be no separation. And they would, I believe, try to change that if and when they become the government under Trump, and he would sign off on that in a heartbeat.
I mean, they've clearly not read the Constitution or even understand the most basic details about the founding fathers or any of that.
No, they would hate it if they did, yes.
But and of course, let's not even get into the Second Amendment, or maybe we should. Well-organized militia, which is what is tolerated within law, not individuals holding, combat-style semi-automatic rifles. I mean, that's going to be controversial for some, but it should be a fairly simple question. And Japan, which is not a militarized society with the quantity of guns, you could count the number of gun murders they have in a year on the fingers of two hands compared to the tens of thousands in the US.
It's insanity that we're letting this country be ruled specifically about gun laws by 17th century or 18th century philosophy and 18th century weapons systems. I don't know about you, but I'd have a real hard time reloading a musket in a very short period of time. And even if I did, aiming the damn thing would be pretty rough. There's not going to be any mass shootings, school shootings with muskets. And the word militia also, as you said, that's pretty clear. It doesn't mean my next door neighbor walking around my street with an AR-15 and a Glock strapped to his hip in open territory, fully loaded, cocked and locked, whenever he wants to. That's not what a well-regulated militia is. There was very specific reasons for that phrase. I think it never should have made it into the Constitution, but there was very specific reasons for that. We were just finished a revolution against an army who invaded our homes and took our weapons away and arrested people without cause. Okay, got that. Well, that was then. We haven't had a revolution since then, and I hope we never do again. And these were muskets. You shouldn't apply 18th century weaponry to 21st century weaponry and philosophy. And only in America would this happen. And look at the price that we're paying for it.
Mm. And to make that Russian connection again as well, this is ideal for Russian propaganda, which
Hmm.
isn't designed to convince you of a point of view. It's designed to weaken your enemies. It's designed to find the fault lines in a society and prize them apart. And of course, it's been in the news that there was actually at least one, probably many more, Russian agents within the NRA.
Well, counterintelligence 101 as well as intelligence 101 shows you that any foreign intelligence service, hostile intelligence service, their main goal is to make fault lines, to cause division within the enemy, to cause them to question themselves and to start fighting amongst themselves. Well, Russia's done a hell of a job, bang up job with that. And even when you tell the NRA, even when you tell these gun nuts, even when you tell these evangelicals and Republicans and MAGA and QAnon nuts that that's exactly what Russia is doing, and that they, meaning these QAnon and nutcases, are their pawns, that they are using them like fools, idiots, to do this, to cause the division, useful idiots in America. Again, even if they accept it, they say they don't care because they need to burn America down. Liberal America's got to go. They're not going to allow it to become a socialist country. And that if that's what it means, aligning themselves with Russia, so be it. And that's very, very scary. And that's the point that we're at here.
And that is a feature, isn't it, of revolutionary thinking. It's a feature of revolutionary ideologies, and it's a feature of religion, that to create this idealized future, you have to tear down and destroy what exists in the present because it has no value. And
Yeah.
I guess, like you, I'm a sort of incremental liberal. I believe in evolutionary processes as being the ones that produce, the most interesting results in society, where changes are retained and built upon, stuff is lost and stuff is gained. This revolutionary evangelical way of thinking is extremely corrosive, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you just again brought up an excellent point. With any revolution, with any insurgency, you have to first of all have an enemy. If there isn't an enemy, you need to create one. And you need to create a situation where it's them against us. It's not just them against us. This is existential. That if we don't win this battle, and there has to be a battle, we will cease to exist. They don't want to just control us. They want to exterminate us. They hate everything about us. And so we have to get them before they get us. That's been the root cause of every insurgency throughout history. And it's exactly the playbook that the evangelicals and the far right wing is using here in America right now. And again, and I hate to keep saying this, anybody that's worked at all in intelligence, counterintelligence, counterinsurgency, counterterrorism knows this. This is right off the first class that you have in this, but that knowledge doesn't help us because in a post-truth society where in America, education is thought to be, a curse, and that there is no truth. Everyone has their own facts. Nobody listens. Nobody listens. And violence is king. And so it's a very, very volatile and dangerous situation.
And of course, we as liberals will say, well, actually, we've got an open media, we have certain freedoms, Russia doesn't. But actually, there are many more parallels than you'd expect. Russian propaganda doesn't speak with a single voice. It creates a polyphony of voices. It creates confusion. It throws millions of different alternative facts out there. The main process actually is to create confusion, isolation, get people really not to be sure of their point of view, and it works incredibly effectively. It also creates these little cult echo chambers for the radicalized, minority. And we see the same process in the US, don't we? Is there actually any difference between Russian TV propaganda and Fox News, AON, Newsmax, and Breitbart?
Yes, and that's a great question. And I've been thinking about that in preparation for this interview. There is a difference, and I'll tell you what that is. In Russia, they do all of the things that you said, but one of their main goals, at least right now, and probably during the communist era as well, was to do all the things you said and also to create complacency. They want a very apathetic Russian citizenry. They don't want people who keep track of the news. They don't want people to look at foreign affairs or even to look at what the government is doing. They want people to say, I'm not interested in politics, or I don't even watch the news. In fact, right now, the most popular shows on Russian TV and on the internet are gardening and cooking shows and in animal shows, nature. Why?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to have anything to, they don't want to know. They don't want to know. The difference is in America, the Fox Newses, the ONNs, the Breitbarts, and the radical right-wing media here want to do something very, very different. They want to radicalize. They want to ignite the anger. They want a violent public. They actually are stoking the insurrection. They do not want a complacent audience. They want people that at the end of that show say, damn it, I'm going to do something about this, or I hate Biden, or I'm something. They're just all riled up and they want to do something negative, violent. That's a big difference. I don't know if that's always been that way. I tend to think it has been, at least during the latter part of the Soviet Union, but it is now, because the last thing Putin wants is an involved citizenry.
Exactly. It's a big difference, isn't it?
Apathetic. Oh, it's very different. You've got two opposite polar situations here. America, very volatile. The right-wing media wants to rile people up. In Russia, they want to put them to sleep.
Exactly. And if, of course, they do win, a January 6th style, or even if they're able to inflict a democratic coup on the system, they might flip to that Russian model once they've established their authoritarian system. Then they'll want people to be indifferent. But right now, they want people to tear up the norms, tear up the institutions, turn on each other. So I guess, yes, it's a very different outcome that those two media models are seeking to.
Oh, absolutely. And I really don't believe here in America with the radical right, they know what they want. They really don't. That's my firm opinion. They want to burn it all down. They are just so full of irrational hate. There can be hate based on legitimate circumstances. Not that I condone hate, but there can be hate for legitimate reasons. In America, it's irrational hate. It's an invented, delusionary hate. They've made themselves the victims when there is no victimhood. So they don't know what they would do or what they want should they win all the elections, except to burn everything down.
This is the frightening
of course,
thing,
they would have to do something. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I say that manipulation is the frightening thing, because until 2014, if you polled most Russians, they would have maybe some stereotypical views of Ukrainians as, being not so smart, being, maybe provincial and whatever. So they would definitely have national stereotypes that are largely, unfounded, but every society has those. Post 2014, they're continuously told day in, day out that you have to hate this group of people. And with some, that works. Similarly, and this is going to upset a lot of people, Brexit is a similar thing. If you look at polls in 2013, 2014, or even go back further, 2012, when we had the Olympics, if you polled people about what their top 10 most fervent political desires were, what really, gets them riled up, the EU probably wouldn't have even made it into the top 10. But at some point, you managed to create a cult around a particular issue or combination of issues. And now, however many years it is, since 2016, we're looking at sort of 6 years later. If you are to poll people now, we see that it's actually a similar proportion of the population that hold the views, anti-EU views they held in 2016. It hasn't really changed in 6 years. So despite all the evidence that it's not working, despite the economic damage, despite our allies in the US and other places pointing out to us that it's pretty much one of the silliest things any country has ever done to itself, the actual cultist views of that have not changed, not 1 inch, because people's emotions, their identity is now closely intertwined with that political position, whether, based on rational information or not. How on earth do we go from here, where it seems that facts, evidence have no sway in dissuading people of, I would say, unfounded points of view?
Again, you make a great point. I think what happens is when any group reaches the point where they have created a cult, and you're right, I believe Brexit's a cult. I believe MAGA and QAnon and the Republicans have developed a cult. Putin and the Russian government now, or Putin at least, is a cult. Once you reach that level where you have brainwashed people to the point where there are no facts except what the cult tells them, I relate this to a forest fire. It's counterintuitive that you would put out a fire with another fire. You'd think water. No. Any fireman or good firefighter would tell you, no, when it's reached a certain point, the only thing you can do is make a fire break. You have to set a fire to put the fire out, to let it burn itself out. I believe we're at the stage where we have to let these cults burn themselves out, not by not doing anything, no, by doing what we have to do, redoubling what has to be done. And if that means physically fighting them or taking away their funding or voting them out of office or all of that, we have to do it. But there's no quick fix, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's no massive education system or a project that we can put into place. We can't do mass incarcerations. No. We obviously can't be doing mass violence or deportations. We have to do a little bit of the common sense things, which is education, which is voting these radical people out of office, which is defeating the authoritarians such as Putin and I believe Trump. But that's going to take time. You cannot break a cult overnight. In fact, I believe it takes years. So the bottom line is, Jonathan, I think we're in for a very rough few years with the cults that we're talking about in the UK, in Russia, and in America.
And what you're talking about here really is going back to grassroots democracy. It's taking the people who are not yet radicalized and working with them, persuading them, giving them the tools like media literacy and just, as you say, creating a fire break.
Education. If there's one word out of all of this, I mean, if people remember one word, it's education. Yes, and that takes a very, very long time, but there's no other way. We have to make, even if it means taking them by the scruff of the neck and forcing them into a book or into a computer monitor and forcing them to read history, forcing them to become computer literate, forcing them to become knowledgeable with real facts. And real misery. Show them what Russia has done. Show them what the radical right has done. Show the misery, the economic misery that Brexit has caused. Just force them to learn this, and then make the next generation have a mandatory education in those things. Increase civic education, which at least in the States is non-existent. Americans don't know how their own government works, much less how to change it or how to vote. These things all take time, but it has to be done. And education is the key.
And we have to hope that a defeat of Putin, which will almost inevitably lead to his dethronement, that might stem the flow of money into, divisive organizations and so on. But that won't be enough, I think. We, as you say, we absolutely have to invest in education. We have to create a fire break between the radicalized part of the population and almost inoculate the rest in terms of their understanding of digital media, in terms of their media literacy and resilience, and almost wait for the radicalized generation to die out, which of course is what happened in the 50s and 60s in Nazi Germany. They didn't convert that generation. They had to wait for them to pass into the ground.
Until at least the mid-50s or later, the 60s. I was just going to say that, like with Trump is the leader of Trumpism. Trump will eventually leave the stage, hopefully sooner than later, but Trumpism will not die, unfortunately. He's planted the seeds, whether it's DeSantis or any number of pretenders. Trumpism, the poison that he has inflicted on us, will continue. The same in Russia. Putin's going to go, whether it's tomorrow, next year, next month, and in how he goes in a wooden box or to a dacha outside of Moscow, nobody knows. But he will go. But Putinism will not go. And I believe, and I think you'll concur, that the Russian public right now is not in a good spot, not in a good place. Even if he goes, the next person very likely will be worse. And even if they totally pull Russian forces out of Ukraine, Russia's going to be a basket case. And if anything, it's maybe even going to be like Germany after World War I. They're going to be so angry that they want to do something even worse. They're going to really feel like victims. and want to lash out. And so the next leader may stoke that anger, just as Hitler did after World War I. And the Russian public is primed for this, 80% of them at least, for Russian nationalism and being victims and wanting to resurrect the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. So I have very mixed opinions and feelings about what's going to come after Putin. And a lot of my opinions are not good, not positive.
And I think that's why, this, I created this channel. That's why, you were keen to appear on it. It's because I think we both believe that this threat isn't going to go away. Whoever replaces Putin will potentially be more of a rabid naturalist than Putin was. Putin, in some ways, until recently, was an opportunist rather than an ideologue. And now these techniques have been developed. These techniques of propaganda, brainwashing, they've been developed and exported to radical groups around the world. Really, the genie is out of the bottle. So I think, yes, that threat will continue from Russia, but also Trump is not necessarily, the world's greatest genius. And whoever replaces him now knows that they can challenge democracy, that they can use undemocratic, even violent techniques.
Yes.
But whoever replaces Trump, a figure like Tucker Carlson, may be far more strategic, far more intelligent, and unfortunately, more successful.
Well, and that's what I fear. Again, the parallels between Russia and America right now are just too eerie. Whoever replaces Putin, I believe, unfortunately, the chances are better than even. It's going to be worse. Why? He's going to be a smarter Putin, just for the reasons you said. He's going to learn the mistakes of Putin. Nobody's going to make the same mistakes, at least not right away. They're going to learn from that, and they're also going to pander to the Russian public. They know what works now. They know what they can do and what they can't get away with. They know that they fed the Russian public all these lies, and that if they just play it the right way, they've got a very apathetic public who will go along with almost anything if they cater to their nationalism, if their sense of wounded pride against Mother Russia up against the rest of the world. Russians love nothing better than victimhood. They love it. You just can't lose if you do that. And the same thing here. Again, the parallels. Trump has made an entire class of people here who believe that they are the ultimate victims. In this case, it's the Christian nationalists, the evangelicals. They are the victims of the radical left, the secular America who doesn't understand them, who looks down their noses at the common man, and they just want to exterminate them. And they will do anything to change that. So I think the next Putin, the next Trump, is going to be more dangerous. So we're in for a rough ride.
Well, that's a pessimistic place to leave it on, but I think almost all the speakers that I've got on the channel tend towards this note of caution and this note of skepticism and even pessimism. Even with Ukrainian victory on the horizon, there's a lot to still worry about. David, thank you so much for your time and insights. Do keep up your spirited defense of US democracy and Ukraine on social media. Don't let the bans on platforms like LinkedIn get you down, and your work amongst the intelligence community to try and propagate these ideas is incredibly important. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jonathan.